Hello, everyone, and welcome to the April Bookathon. I am David S. Pederson. I'm going to be your moderator for Inspired, Where Ideas Come From. Do you ever ponder where your favorite author came up with the ideas and inspiration for their book or books? Now is your chance to find out. We have some excellent and esteemed Bold Strokes Books authors on our panel today that will be discussing that topic. And as I call out each author's name, please tell us a little bit about yourselves and what your latest book is. Hold up a copy if you can. Jennifer Karter, let's start with you.
Sounds good, thanks. So I'm Jennifer Karter, and I live in the DC area with my spouse, our newborn, and 2 cats. When I'm not writing, I work in international development. I like quilting, and I do board games, especially Dungeons and Dragons. And this is my new book, The Witch Queen's Mate. It is a fantasy action romance between Bada, the new queen of the Neomertes, and Sylvie, a spectered veterinarian, who are forced together despite the fact that the Neomertes and the specters hate each other. They're sworn enemies. When Bada's ritual to become queen gives Sylvie all the powers of the queen's mate, including superhuman strength and speed to protect Bada.
Sounds awesome. Fits right into your Dungeons and Dragons thing, too. So that's really
Absolutely.
cool. Anne, how about you?
Hello, I am Anne Shade. I have written one book just recently released, and I also have an anthology with Julie Cannon and Aaron Dutton, and both of those came out in February. I live in West Orange, New Jersey, and have been writing forever and a day, and I live here with my wonderful spouse, my Payton took his son, and my equally elderly dog.
Oh, that sounds awesome. How about you, Melissa?
Well, I am coming to you today from San Antonio, Texas, where it's getting a little warm here, actually. I'm an author of contemporary romance. I kind of hope that my romances come off as fun and flirty. That's my goal. I'm writing book 21 now, which was kind of astounding to think about. But my current release is book number 20, which is exclusive, and it's a newsroom romance. It takes place in TV news, and it's the story of Skylar, who's a fledgling reporter, and Carrie, who is a veteran anchor, and their particular romance. And so I had a lot of fun with this one, and hope you guys like it as well. And I'm really excited for this panel topic today. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting some ideas. You said 21?
Yeah, I'm writing 21 now. Yeah.
Awesome. Really terrific. And Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda Radley. I'm from Chester in the United Kingdom. I live with my wife and my 2 cats, and because that's required, I think. My latest releases are Grounded and Journey's End, which is books 2 and 3 in the Flight series, which are re-releases. They are contemporary romance. I like to think I'd like to think I'm funny, so I think they're funny. Hopefully other people do. There's the story of Olivia and Emily, who basically, I took a flight once from New York over to the UK, and I wrote a 3-book series on it, but there's more than that, so you should check them out.
Yeah,
Wow.
Absolutely. I love humor and romance. I think that's a great combination. So that's a lot of fun. Well, these are some great authors. If you haven't yet picked up the books by these authors, please do so. Jennifer, are you more inspired by what you see, what you hear, what you read, and why?
I would say what I see and read. I'm definitely inspired by other stories, obviously. But what I like to really do, even if it never becomes a story, is that when I read another story or see a movie or a show, I like to kind of break it down into one of its most basic concepts. So like, for example, Romeo and Juliet could be said to be kind of where I got The Witch Queen's Mate, that one of its very core pieces is the idea of lovers from opposing groups, right? But then I wanted to do stuff that was entirely different with it, that it wasn't love at first sight. It was more of an enemies to lovers, that, they don't even speak the same language, so they can't have a lot of the kind of similar interactions that like Shakespeare would have. And then from there, once I have kind of that concept, I like to build a world for it to live in. So yeah, so movies and shows and books, I would say, are where I get it from.
Awesome. I love that. I love that. Anne, how about you?
My inspiration kind of comes a little bit from everywhere. I am inspired by, things that stories that I hear about real people, stories that not anything I see on TV, but more or less maybe what I've read in the news or seen in an article or something. I'm inspired by just anything that comes to mind, especially some people. If I hear a story from a person, I'm working on one now that will be released next year called Three Wishes. And it was, someone liked my fairy tale novella so well, they said, well, I would love if someone did something like that with, an Aladdin type theme. And the young lady talked about how much that, she loved that story when she was younger. And she always envisioned herself as Aladdin. And I said, So I said, okay, well, that inspired me to work on Three Wishes. And so it can come from anywhere.
Very true. 3 wishes. Everybody wishes they had 3 wishes or more. How about you, Melissa? What inspires you?
I'm somebody who has pretty intense storytelling envy, and like Anne, I'm just kind of attracted to good storytellers in every sense of the word in whatever medium. But I do find that the thing that gets me most excited is reading a good book. And I ask myself why, and I think every writer has their lists of strengths and weaknesses. And I think that I'm a better storyteller than I am a writer. And so when I can pick up a book that's rich in story, but also the words are just singing and flying off the page and really impressing upon me just how great that particular writer is with words, that instead of getting upset or jealous, I get excited to write. And I want to sit down and see if I can make myself better. And I also can remember what it is that they did that inspired me. And I know there are some writers out there who are fearful of picking up a book and then picking up the voice of that author into their own writing. And so they avoid reading anything in their genre. I don't find that's the case with me, because I find that I don't know that I could adopt their style even if I wanted to, and I would want to. But in fact, it makes me remember the things that I need to pay attention to. So if I read a book that was rich in description, then the next time I'm writing, I might remember, you know what, I need to paint a more vivid picture for my reader. And so it's just a little tap on the shoulder for me to stay on top of that. And so it always makes me happy when I find a really good read, because I know that it's going to take me a little bit further in my own writing.
That's terrific. Yeah, I think you have to be a reader to be able to write, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, big time.
How about you, Amanda?
I find inspiration everywhere. And I don't know if I'm just incredibly nosy, but if I'm in the post office queue and someone's having a conversation, I will be listening. And I'll turn I'll have my headphones on, because otherwise they might talk to me. But, I'll have no music so I can hear them. And then if the queue moves, I'm like, but what happened? So then I have to fill in the gaps. And I do that with TV shows and things like that as well. Sometimes I'll be watching a TV show and it will just go off in the wrong direction by my standards. And I'll be like, well, if I was the showrunner here, we'd be doing something completely different. And I think most of all, it really helps that my wife's an author as well. So we are constantly talking about stories we've heard, things we've read, things we've seen, ideas that other people have had, ideas that we've had, and sort of playing with those ideas and having those conversations. And quite often we'll have quite in-depth conversations about, well, this thing happened, but maybe wouldn't it be funny if that happened as well? Or would it be funny if this happened at the same time that happened? And the problem is she writes fantasy. So, we're never saying, I was on the spaceship the other day and the magical unicorn, we're talking about real life things. So I benefit from this incredibly, and she not so much. So I've definitely got the good side of that. But pretty much anything can inspire you. And I think that's one of the things for me about being an author that you're just curious about things, and you wonder about stuff, and you're interested in what other people are saying and doing, and there's a little bit of gossip or like something you've overheard. You can't let it go. You're like, well, but what happened next? I think that's it for me.
Two authors in the family. Oh my. That's terrific. And I love your post office story. That ties into my next question, actually. I'm going to start with Melissa on that one. Have you ever been inspired by a real life incident?
I was thinking about this, just kind of going through things that have snagged me and turned into actual stories. And I'm not sure that I would say a real life incident, but I would say my history or my past in a more general sense. This book right here is TV news, and it was inspired by my first year out of college. I was a TV news reporter. And so there are several parallels to stories in this particular book that I lived through. And I don't want to give any spoilers away, but there's some accidents that happen, people getting hurt here or there, that were very similar incidents that I witnessed firsthand at my news station. And so I don't know if that's me just being lazy with research, just picking jobs that I've had that I can pull real life information from. And I've done that with theater as well, which is a background of mine. Or it's just things that I know that I can turn into a good story because they're rich in drama, and everybody in the newsroom is in everybody else's business. I remember the station that I worked at, the assignment editor was dating the morning news anchor, and one of the cameramen was dating the morning news producer, and there were like 4 or 5 more relationships like that. So I realized pretty quickly that once I started writing romance, that a TV news station was ripe for not only love and drama, but a lot of conflict as well that stems from that. And so I think that just in everyday life, I can look back and find inspiration from my past. And definitely did with this particular book.
That's terrific. Wow, what a great background. What a great stories you've had.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Anne, how about you? Any real life inspirations?
Like Melissa, I've a lot of mine, or one inspiration, especially a major one for Love and Lotus Blossoms, was my own background. Other than that, any real life stories, not really. Like people's names will kind of trigger a story if I hear a name that I like, and I'll kind of weave a story around that person, that name. But Love and Lotus Blossom is the closest I've come to something being based on a real life story. It's, takes place in the town I grew up in. Some of the things that I did and some of the things that I saw in that town are also within, in the settings. So that's probably the closest that I've come to it.
Okay, very cool. Yeah. How about you, Jennifer?
Amanda, you mentioned that it can be harder to bring life into kind of these fantasy or sci-fi novels. I definitely find that to be true. But one of the biggest places where I see things kind of working their way from my life into my books is I usually have like one secondary character who's very much based on someone in my life. So like for Which Queen's Mate, it was Sylvie's father is very much, he's got a lot of my father in him. And then in the next one that I'm working on, one of the main character's mentors is based on one of mine. So not so much real life experiences like plot items, but oftentimes even just a setup. It'll be, what if this person and this person were in this kind of world? What would I do there? Because my books are all for the most part world building.
Very cool. Yeah, it's like fun, and that makes sense too. And Amanda, I know you mentioned the post office. Were there any other real life situations that ever kind of spurred you on to write?
Yeah, definitely. Like Melissa, I have a catalogue of over 20 books. So yeah, there's, you invariably start picking up from your own history. So Grounded and Journey's End are out now, are part of the Flight series. So the Flight series basically happened because my wife and I took a first class flight when we were on our honeymoon. And I'm an aviation geek, so I'm in the first class cabin being like, wow, this is exciting and interesting. And then there was this woman who just seemed like it was just the most blasé, boring thing to her to be sort of in first class. Everyone else was like super excited, and she was just like, oh, Thursday. And everyone knew who she was, and everyone else in first class was going, who's that? Is she famous? And I asked one of the stewardesses in the end, and she said, oh, she's just a businesswoman. She does this trip all the time. And I was like, wow. So I wrote her story from my perspective and completely changed her and made her slightly more interesting than she seemed. But she looked down at everyone. And in my brain, I just thought, I wonder what she would do if there was something unexplainable here. Like, what if there was a child, if she looked across the aisle and in a first class seat was a 5-year-old boy, and she had no idea why, because she just seemed the kind of person that everything was in its place. And I just thought, wouldn't it be fascinating to see what was happening in her mind if there was something just out of the ordinary that she couldn't explain, and she didn't seem like the sort of person who would ask. And 3 books came from that. So it was the smallest incident of just seeing a person on a plane that then grew into this very large series and these very sort of involved characters. But I'd say there's an element in all of my books. Like, I have a friend who's terrified of heights and works on the first floor of an office block. And she's terrified to get a promotion because it means she's going to have to go up to the 10th floor. So my Christmas novel, Humbug, is essentially her story of being promoted to the top floor of the building. And she for ages has been turning down these promotions. And I just think that's fascinating. It's like, well, maybe work for a new company that's on a ground floor level, or just don't be frightened of promotion. But yeah, I'm always finding inspiration in real life.
That's awesome. Yeah. Real life can inspire lots of fascinating things. And I really want to fly first class. I'm 6'3", and I'm like, coaches. That's terrific. What a great story. So, Melissa, you talked about reading and how much you love to read. Who's your favorite author? Is there a particular author that's inspired you more than anyone else?
I mean, at different points in my life, it's always changed. I look back my early romance reading days, and it was Judith McNaught. I don't know if you know this author, but she started in Regency romance, and then she kind of moved her way into contemporary. And I found her contemporaries first. And what I really admired about her and still hold on to this day is her storytelling and how complicated and textured it is. She could not be like me. She could not be a pantser. She'd have to be a plotter. So I aspire to that one day. And then more recently, when I think about the written word and the writing style really impressing me, I think of Christina Lauren, who was actually a writing duo, specializing in contemporary, but they've kind of moved into women's fiction lately. And I read recently a book of theirs that I found very inspiring, just for how they were using words to convey their particular convention of storytelling. And then Taylor Jenkins Reid recently, everyone's been talking about her work and how great it is. And I'm right on board with that. And so it's really exciting when you find talented authors to then follow their career and watch how they grow and change and shift. And there's just so much to hold on to and look back on. And so those are 3 authors that stand out in my mind.
Yeah, great authors. Thank you. Anne, how about you? Any authors that have inspired you over the years or currently inspiring you?
My all-time favorite is Beverly Jenkins. She is my idol. She's spent some time as my mentor for a little while. And just her writing style is so natural. It's like it flows out of her. And I've actually seen her come up with stuff just like that in the spur of the moment, just, as an example of the characters that talk to her in her head. And she's really a huge inspiration for me. Recently, since I've been writing for Bold Stroke Books, it has been Georgia Beers and Melissa Brayden. Their writing is so, once again, they also have that natural style. When you read them, it's like you're caught up in this conversation with these people and that you're a part of their lives, and the humor and the friendships that are in both of their writing styles and stories is like really fun for me. And it has inspired, like the friendships that I have within my stories were kind of inspired by how Melissa and Georgia write with their companions and their friends and their stories.
Wow,
and I'm not just saying that because she's here.
I'm slipping you the $20 bill.
Cash App.
Yeah, Venmo. Gotcha.
Well, I concur. I think you are all inspirational authors,
Oh,
personally.
thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You guys are super talented. Jennifer, same question. Any authors that inspire you?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. So I've been trying to write for a while, right? And I tried to write like Stephen King because he was one of my favorite authors. And I sent my book to some betas and they were like, oh God, this is so dark. I don't want to read it. Then I tried to write like Carrie Pratchett, you know, to hit the total opposite end. And I just wasn't that funny. So I really worked on kind of finding my own style, you know, discovering that trying to be like someone else just wasn't working for me. So I would say that now, you know, my biggest inspirations that kind of drive me to write and I think have done really great things, especially in the genre. I really like Karen Collier and I really love Barbara Ann Wright. I think she does an amazing job. You know, one of the things I strive to do that I think she does exceedingly well is having a plot and a romance that are both really intriguing and really drive the story that, you know, both could live without the other, but they live in harmony so well.
That's challenging to do, but that's, yeah, very good. Absolutely. And Amanda, any authors that inspire you particularly?
Yeah, but for different reasons. I'm probably the only author you're going to meet who doesn't read much fiction. I don't have a lot of time, and also I'm on the spectrum, and it just doesn't work for me. If I'm writing a book and I read someone else's, I forget my characters' names and what I was doing and everything. I'm just in this one that I'm reading, and I go back, and then if you're 50,000 words into a novel and you've got to read it all to remind yourself where you're at, that takes a long time to write a book. So unfortunately, when I'm writing, I can't read, and I'm always writing. So on the times I've had breaks, I've worked out that I can read scripts. I'm very good at reading like movie scripts and TV scripts and things like that. And I have quite a few friends who work in that industry. So that's very fun for me because I can get dialogue and things like that from there, because that's all a script is. And it's really fascinating to see how someone can influence you to fully understand a character's motivations just through dialogue. There's not a single thing they're telling you about this person. You're just finding out by how they're talking and maybe a tiny bit of information about where they are. And I find that fascinating, and I like to try to put that into my novels. I'm usually quite dialogue heavy because I much prefer that style. But when I do read, I do read Melissa Brayden and Georgia Beers. And also Marianne Keyes and Sophie Kinsella, and especially quite a lot of UK women's fiction authors who will write basically romantic comedies and things like that, because they're just such fun to read. And I think reading has to be quite enjoyable, because I have to get through it pretty quickly, because then I'm on to my next book. So I can, you know, Marianne Keyes books are enormous, about 600 pages, but, you know, I can burn through them quite quickly because they are just such good fun to read.
Yeah, a book that moves along fast is always fun to read. And scripts, yeah, screenwriting, that's a whole other genre, but very cool. I agree. And that's kind of neat because absolutely inspiration can come from all different places and all different sources. So that's awesome. Melissa, you have obviously written a lot of books. You got a lot of readers, many on this panel. Have any of them ever motivated you to write a sequel or change a character?
I was thinking hard on this too, to try to think if that's ever happened. And I don't think it's happened, but it also hasn't not, because I'm still considering a couple of suggestions. I've had certain characters, especially side characters, who I didn't think too much of. I mean, they were helpful in their own right, but once you start to see a character that you didn't notice step out into the spotlight and get a lot of attention from the readership, and multiple people start mentioning that character, then you start thinking, well, maybe they do have more to say. Maybe there's a story there that I should explore. So I have a couple of secondary characters in my back pocket that I would not have in my back pocket if it weren't for some readers kind of tapping me on the shoulder and sending me an email or two to let me know. So I think in that sense, yes. I've also had just recently my editor say, oh, I've noticed that you're kind of like leaving some stuff open on the side character over here. Are you going to write about? And I went, I didn't realize I was doing that, but that's a great idea. I think I might write about that side character. So that would be an additional one. So sometimes people can look at your work and they can see things that you don't necessarily see because, you know, it's a forest for the trees situation and you're a little bit too close. So I do find those things helpful when readers point them out. And I do feel inspired by it because now I have all these ideas percolating that I would not have otherwise had.
Terrific. I look forward to hearing more about these ideas.
We'll see.
How about you, Anne? Any of your readers ever motivate you or inspire you to write a sequel or change a character?
Not to write a sequel, but as I said before, Three Wishes was inspired by a reader and her story and how she enjoyed femtale so much that she wanted to see a contemporary version of Aladdin type story. And that was the biggest inspiration. I did have Georgia actually inspired the dog in my novella in My Secret Valentine, Max, because of her writing her pets and dogs, and so she inspired Max. But those are the biggest as far as readers and fellow authors.
Very cool. And how about you, Amanda? Any reader inspiration coming your way ever?
It's funny because my first instinct was to say, no, that's never happened. And then my wife reminded me it's happened 3 times. I think if I get the feedback from someone instantly, I just think no, because I'm already writing my next book. So if I release a book and people say, I like this character or this book, I'd like more of this, I have the next 2 planned. So I never immediately do it, but then later on I kind of think about it and go, oh, well, maybe. So in my head, I think I haven't, but in reality I have. I've done it with obviously Flight. Flight and Grounded were essentially one very, very long manuscript that got torn into 2, but Journey's End was a sequel which came later and finished up the story. I did it with Bring Holly Home, and I did it with a book called The Road Ahead as well. So I've done it multiple times, and I, like Melissa, I kind of go, well, that character's interesting. And there has been times as well when I've written quite a lot about a character, because sometimes my side characters are very much like, I need someone in a post office queue to say something, and sometimes they're quite fleshed out. And there's been a couple of times when they've been extremely fleshed out, but still with enough gaps that you could maybe follow their journey. And yeah, I always say to readers whenever they contact me, I always say never, because it's not a yes and it's not a no, it's a very easy answer. But I think never say never actually means yes, but not right now.
That's awesome. Never say never. My mother used to say that too, but hers meant no. And Jennifer, how about you? Any reader inspiration?
So this is actually my first published novel, so it hasn't happened yet. But, you know, I hope to engage with my readers going forward, and I'm really hoping that it will happen.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Yeah, absolutely.
It will.
It will.
It will.
That's terrific. Well, Jennifer, how about when inspiration doesn't strike for you? How do you handle that? Do you have any proven methods that work for you to get the ideas flowing when you're writing?
Yeah, so I think for me, interestingly, my biggest bottleneck with writing is getting what's in my head onto the page. By the time I actually start writing a story, I've kind of got the milestone scenes written in my head. So my biggest kind of writer's block is figuring out how to get from point A to point B. And so what I typically do, you know, I like to go for a walk. I've got a big park very close to me, and I talk it usually on the walk. I'm talking it through with friends or family, and you know, they're helping me brainstorm ideas. And in addition to the very good ideas that they often give me, oftentimes they'll give me really silly or ridiculous ideas that just absolutely wouldn't work. And we break apart, well, why doesn't it work? And then oftentimes by breaking down what doesn't work and kind of pulling it out, we figure out and kind of meld it into something that really does work out well.
Oh, that's awesome. So brainstorming, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, the key is to start with something really silly. You know, it can be, well, what if aliens invaded and that's how they got from point A to point B? I'm like, okay, well, but in this world, there aren't aliens. Okay, well, what about another culture? Okay, well, I can't do that because of this. Okay, well, what about, you know, we just keep seeing what would work.
Yeah, one thing leads to another.
Exactly.
How about you, Amanda?
if inspiration doesn't strike with me, it's in a certain place, because I always outline. I'm not like Melissa. I wish I could be a pantser, but I'm not.
I
I'm
wish
a
I could be
plotter.
you.
I know. I wish we could just switch now and then. Well,
Yes.
it would be. So what I try to do is I'm meticulous to the point where I start off with a small idea, and then I grow it out, and I grow out the different plot elements of it. I grow out my story arc, and then my final step in the plotting is to literally say, chapter 1, in this POV, these things happen. Chapter 2, this POV, these things happen, all the way through to the end. And I can't write any of it until I've finished it. I need to know it has an end and it goes somewhere and it works and I can plan it. And that's the place where inspiration sometimes doesn't strike, because I'll be like, chapter 23, these things happen, and then I'll just lose a thread. And that's when I'm really grateful for my wife, which she probably isn't, because she's working on something. And that's when I come into the room and I'm like, I'm here to cause trouble and I need to know how this book finishes, or if this makes sense. So a little bit like Jennifer was saying, I'll bounce ideas off of her. And as I say, because she's an author, it's really handy, because we can both, have that level of discussion that we're talking about. Yeah, but where's this character's redemption arc? And sometimes I'm like, well, I don't want to redeem him. I don't like him. So, but we have those different discussions. That's quite handy. But yeah, for me, it's always in the same period, and that period it can be different, depends on what the book is. Sometimes that period is sort of 10 days. Sometimes it can be a month of plotting. But if I'm ever going to suffer with inspiration, it will be in that point, because other than that, it's just the slog of filling in the gaps.
Cool. Yeah, I can imagine having another author in the family would be both exciting and sometimes crazy.
Yeah.
How about you, Anne? What do you do when your inspiration doesn't flow?
I've recently had that happen. I've been working on the next novel, Securing Ava, and the inspiration was flowing too much, to the point where I wrote too much. And then I had to force myself to stop, but then I got stuck because I couldn't figure out how to end it. And I said, well, maybe I'll end it on a cliffhanger. It is a suspense type novel. And then I got my hand slapped and said, no, it's got to have an ending. So right now I'm struggling. Fortunately, it's with the editor right now, with my editor. So I'm still struggling with trying to get the ending down. And so far it's turned into 20 more pages to the over 100 pages I've already have. So I'm stuck, and so I'm trying to just kind of step away from it and work on something else, and just to kind of clear my mind. But that's when I get to that point, that's what I have to do, is when I'm not feeling inspired, when I'm not feeling like I want to write anything, I'll just write something silly, or I'll just do something that has nothing to do with what I'm doing right then and there, and hopefully be able to get back to it with a fresher mind.
Just step away sometimes. Sometimes.
Yes.
How about you, Melissa?
Well, Dave, I struggle. There was a
Make it
time
look so easy.
No, for years, I wrote alongside a full-time job. And that meant that I was writing fewer books a year and had a little bit of wiggle room. Or if I just wasn't feeling it that day, then I would just set it aside and come back to it. And I would do that a lot because I would struggle. But now that writing is my full-time job and I'm writing more books, I've had to get good at figuring out what to do when inspiration isn't there, because I can't just set it aside. I have bills to pay. I got to make this happen. So what I've learned about myself is something has to change. If it's not working for me, then I need to go to a new scene. And I like to write in a linear fashion, but if I'm not able to do that, I can always just hop to the next scene or something close by timeline wise to what I'm writing. If that's not working, I need to change where I'm sitting. I need to go sit in a different room. I need to go out in public if I'm at my house, or vice versa. If I'm writing comedy, maybe I need to switch and come at it from a dramatic angle, or I need to, do what they do in theater with a French scene. When a new entrance or exit happens, a new French scene begins. Maybe I need to send in a new character to rescue the scene if it's not going somewhere. But something has to change. And it's up to me in that moment to figure out what the thing is that's going to be, that key in the lock that's going to unlock everything. And when that happens, it's great. Lately, really just changing where I'm sitting has helped. I noticed that I was writing the book on a table at the couch, and I was just getting stale and I was getting stuck. So I moved across the room, and now I'm in the armchair, and guess what? It's a magic armchair, because all of a sudden all this, creative energy is swirling all around me. So you have to figure out what that thing is and seize upon it, because I guarantee that magic will run out on that armchair, and I'm gonna have to figure out something else, but that's just part of the game.
Yeah, switch it up. That's a great idea. I like it. I'll have to get myself an armchair.
Yeah.
So Amanda, I know you talked a lot about, not a lot, but you talked a little bit about meeting some people, even briefly, the woman on the airplane, inspired you to create a character based on them, or perhaps even an entire book, and what you perceive about them or their life, or what you imagine it could be. How about the rest of you? Anne, has that ever happened with you?
I don't think so. Other than my background and my story with Love and Lotus Blossom, I think all of my stories pretty much come from, because my stories most of the time come from dreams, or from like whether a daydream or a sleeping dream, and I'll suddenly, the characters will come to me, tell me their stories, tell me what they once said, and then I have to follow their lead and put it on paper. But there's never, I haven't really talked to anyone other than that young lady that actually, would inspire me to do anything. I think my characters, because they're fictional, have to come from a fictional place, because one, I don't want to make anyone I know mad if they read my story. I had to do that with Love and Lotus Blossom. There was a character that was a little too close to home. And I said, okay, if this person reads this, they're going to know. And that's the last thing I need is for them to read this and realize, wait a minute. So I try and stay away from being directly inspired by people that I, know. And strangers not so much inspire me so much, because because I don't know them. I can't really imagine a story for them. I'm not that type of person that can like imagine someone's story just by looking at them.
Okay. Very cool. How about you, Jennifer? Any inspiration from people that you've met or seen?
Yeah, it doesn't happen a lot, but I have one that definitely inspired an entire story. I worked at basically a resort for 3 seasons, and there was this one woman who had a near adult tantrum over the fact that the ice in her iced tea was all melted. Heaven forbid. So she inspired a story, a so far unwritten story, about a resort where the customer service is just a little too good to be true.
Fascinating. That sounds like fun. I think
yeah, it was definitely a good way to take something that was like, I could strangle you right now, and to, hey, or I could write a story about you.
Yes, I like the story idea better. How about you, Melissa?
Yeah, I like taking quirks, weird little things about people, kind of what, Amanda and Jennifer both, your people, your first class passenger and your iced tea woman might be the same individual. I don't know. But funny quirks are great to borrow for me. I was writing a scene this week that I borrowed from a friend of a friend that I met, who just throughout the course of our 5-minute conversation just kept saying, oh, what's the word for that? And then would move on. And then 2 sentences later, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? And I thought, you're constantly searching for words. It must be exhausting. And I wound up putting that on a blind date this week that my main character went on, and that the blind date was constantly looking for a specific word, to the point that it became very repetitive and obnoxious in a fun way. And so I hope I never run into the person I stole it from and they find out. But I don't think I've ever borrowed a full individual and plopped them into a book, but I will steal your quirky little treat.
I'll do that too. I'll do that too. I'll take little quirks or something, but not like the whole persona.
Right.
Well, I'd love to find out how that blind date ends, Amanda. Melissa.
I don't think well. I don't think it's going to end well.
I suspect not.
Yeah.
And Melissa, you talked a little bit about the magic armchair and location. Anything else that kind of helps with inspiration? I mean, do you prefer to be out in nature, or do you like a quiet room or a busy coffee shop? Do you have music playing?
I think that a quiet room does a whole lot for me, and it kind of just lets me go. But there's something to be said about people watching in public. And I noticed that I don't walk away from a situation like that with a very high word count because I'm quite occupied by everything that's going on around me. I used to love to go to Barnes and Noble and sit in the cafe at like 9 a.m. and watch the people come and go, and the group that would always meet in the corner when they'd each bring in a newspaper. And I was so curious about why they each needed a newspaper that they never read, but they always came in with one. And so I think that's just a really cool reminder about humanity and people and how they interact with each other that kind of gets my fur up and gets me excited to sit down and write. But then I walk out and my word count's about a third of what it should be. So I have to do that sparingly to actually get my work done. I probably do need quiet. So I like to mix it up.
Okay, good, awesome. And Amanda, how about you?
Yeah, I'm like Melissa. I need quiet. I'm generally here in my office, although sometimes the magic chair thing is totally real. Sometimes I'll sit downstairs and suddenly I write so much more. But then the magic does run out and I have to chase it back up here. But generally quiet. But I have a writing playlist of songs that I really like, but I think I've played them so much that they just turn into white noise. So if there's any, because there's a window here and I'm the nosiest person in the world, so a little bit like the coffee shop, if there's anything happening out there, I'm suddenly looking. So if I hear anything, I have to put my headphones in and I have to put some music on, but it has to be something that I don't really want to listen to. So I do have a writing playlist, but it's so common to me that it's just turned into white noise. But no, I'm generally quite fussy. Like my wife would just crack open the laptop in an airport and I'd be like, what do they call the gate? Or what if, so yeah, no, I'm very fussy.
Okay, very cool. So headphones in, blinds closed.
Well, it depends. I mean, if it's really interesting, there was an ambulance the other day and that was just a good half hour of my day gone when I was wondering what was happening. So,
Well, you never know. How about you, Jennifer? What do you prefer?
Yeah, so I also like to listen to music, but one of the things I like to do, especially when I'm first creating the characters of the world, is I create a Spotify or YouTube playlist for that book or that character. And then I listen to that while I'm writing about them. And I find that to be really helpful because it can kind of make stuff match their personality or whatever and kind of dive into, well, what do they sound like? But then I also, it's funny, Leslie, you were talking about being in a coffee shop, but you actually don't get a lot written. That's me in nature. I love to go. I'm in nature. I'm like, I better write a bunch. I do get a lot of ideas, but I get so little written. I wish I could write more because I really like being, out in nature to write, but I just get so distracted and I'll find myself on a completely different story. I'm like, well, this is great for that story, but get back to this one.
Right. Stay focused. How about you, Anne?
I like the quiet also. My favorite time to write is like 5 a.m. when everyone's asleep and I can come across the hall and just start writing. I also like sitting during the nice summer days, sitting in my backyard and I could sit there for hours just writing or on my porch out front. If it's too crazy out front, like if the neighbors are all out and crazy or whatnot, that distracts me. But if it's really quiet, if it's early in the morning, then I love to sit out there for like an hour or two and just write. And music I do listen to help inspire, my stories. Like Jennifer, I'll make a mental playlist of like each story. And so if I feel like, I just need a little reminder of where this story is going, I'll listen to the music, but I can't listen to it while I'm writing, because it's kind of a distraction because I'm one of those people that has to sing to everything. So I can't sing along as I'm writing.
I would do the same. I would totally do the same. We only have like 4 or 5 minutes left, but we had a couple audience questions. So I'm going to go with Ann Hart. She asked, where or what is the most interesting source of inspiration you've had so far? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I'll jump in and say, one of my favorite sources of inspiration, which has gotten me some of my most popular books, comes from writing to a title. And to me, it reminds me of when you go to a museum and you see a painting on the wall, and you might be there with someone else, and you kind of trade ideas about what might be happening and who is that woman at the bar waiting for, and you kind of construct a story around it, and then your friend weighs in on what they think. I think a title can be the same as if you come up with a really cool title, sometimes it leads you to a really cool story. And so I would encourage people out there to not sleep on fun titles. Strawberry Summer came to me that way. I was suggesting it to another writer, Georgia, who didn't use the title, and I thought, well, what kind of story could go behind that? And now I have one of my most popular books from it. And so I learned that lesson, and it's happened again since on other stories. So titles can be a lot of fun to find inspiration.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, I like that. Anybody else?
Jump in. I like challenges of things that are like, well, that could never be a good book. I had a professor who's a professor of international humanitarian law. He'd written a book and he's like, this doesn't make any money. If you can figure out how to write a fiction book about international humanitarian law. And I was like, I want to do that. So where I've gotten to, it has very little to do with it, but I started from there.
Very cool. Yeah, you got to start somewhere.
Right?
How about anybody else? Amanda or Anne?
Yeah, I suppose with me, I quite like the idea of reversing popular tropes. So tropes are great. They're the cornerstone of everything that we do, but sometimes people can be like, oh, I know where that's going. And when I'm writing it, I know that someone knows where it's going. So just to sort of take the essence of it, but turn it on its head a little bit sometimes. I find that quite fun to do.
Very cool. All right, well, we have one other reader question, and then we gotta wrap things up. This comes from Louisa Brooke. She says, hi, many thanks for this talk. Can I ask about locations? Have you ever been inspired by a location which you, oh my reading glasses. This is terrible. Have you ever been inspired by a location which you then set a story in, or does the idea of the story come first and then you decide where to set it? Obviously, fantasy is different, but still inspired by real places to an extent. Anybody?
I'll answer that one.
Yeah.
I did taking place in New Orleans. I love New Orleans. It's inspired a couple of stories. One I self-edited, published years ago, but it also helped inspire the story for Masquerade. But New Orleans is such a rich, wonderful city. And, to take a trip there, I took a trip there just for the story, just so I could do research for the story and learn about it. But that's definitely a major place that I could see myself doing another story there at some point. But yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, New Orleans is definitely inspiring. Anyone else?
I can jump in. I'm originally from Denver, and there are a whole bunch of conspiracy stories around the Denver International Airport. And so one of the stories I'm working on tries to make as many of them true as I can.
Nice. Awesome. Well, I think we're just about out of time. I am fabulous.
Look at that.
Here. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks everyone for your insights and wisdom. I definitely learned a lot. I got some great ideas, and I'm sure you all did too. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.